So we just have two more of these overview videos, serviceability, this one, and the final one will be short columns. The concept of serviceability. Let's talk about this. You want to make sure, and we'll spend so much time in this class doing this, is that the strength of your reinforced concrete is greater than the load, okay? And we'll express this in an equation like phi mn. So the reduced strength is greater than the applied load, okay? And so this is strength design. And so this guarantees that in a catastrophic event, the worst case scenario, the building doesn't collapse. But there's more to a building than just the once in its lifetime worst case scenario. There's the everyday behavior of the building. And so what we want to do is we want every day the building works. Or it's serviceable. Okay. And it's sort of like a bumper in a car. So a bumper in a car in an accident will save your life, but it'll be completely totaled and thrown away. And when they first came up with these integrated molded bumpers, people would just tap them real lightly, and it'd be like $500 worth of damage to repair it. And people got tired of that, especially people that tended to park by Braille. You know, they kept bumping things, and they'd always have to repair the bumper. And so Consumer Reports came up with the 5-mile-per-hour bumper test. They would roll a car at 5 miles per hour into something and then take it to an auto body shop and see how much it costs to repair it. The idea being that if for some reason you routinely hit things at 5 miles per hour, it shouldn't cost a lot to fix. It's kind of a bad example. But in a building, protecting in a crash is the equivalent of like not falling down in an earthquake or not falling down in a hurricane or something like that. That's the strength. But the 5-mile-per-hour test, the everyday, so that should not be everyday occurrence. So hitting something at 5 miles an hour. But the everyday use of the building should be okay. And for buildings, there's two things we're concerned about every day for day-to-day life is deflections and cracks. Okay, and so deflections, you understand that, but cracks are unsightly. Okay, we don't want them, and they look bad. And you would think that calculating deflections is an easy thing. You learn how to do it in 3210. You learn all this virtual work and all sorts of things like that. But in reinforced concrete, it's more complicated than you think. And the reason for that is twofold. So first, when you have a beam, it has a moment of inertia. Okay. But then when you load it, eventually it'll crack. And so it's like the concrete below the neutral axis is gone. There's no concrete in the tension side of the beam because it's cracked. And so the moment of inertia goes way down. And so because of this, up to a certain amount of load, up until the cracking moment, you have a big moment of inertia. And then once you increase the load past the cracking moment, the moment of inertia goes down. And to make it more complicated, the beam isn't cracked everywhere. It's just cracked right under the biggest load. And so what moment of inertia are you going to use for the whole beam? You're going to have to like average part of it's cracked and part of it's not. And so that makes it complicated. We have something called the effective moment of inertia, and it's a function of how much moment's on the beam. So when the moment's small, the effective moment of inertia is essentially uncracked. And when the moment's large, the moment of inertia tends to go more towards the cracked moment of inertia. And you can see how complicated it is. You're going to have to calculate the gross moment of inertia. It's not too bad. This cracked moment of inertia, which you don't know how to do yet. And then you're going to have some kind of averaging of those two things. And you're going to have to average it over the length. So that's what makes calculating deflections complicated, number one. The second reason, okay, calculating deflections for reinforced concrete beams and buildings is hard, is that concrete creeps. And what that means is that when you load concrete, so if you load concrete and it deflects a certain amount, over time, that deflection increases. And this extra deflection eventually can be 2 to 3 times the delta initial, the original deflection. And we'll talk more about that. What makes this complicated is that not all the load is on the beam all the time. The dead load obviously is always on the beam, and so that will creep. But the live load, sometimes there's people in the classroom, sometimes there's not. But there's a certain percentage of live load, like desks and things like that. They're considered live load, but they're pretty much always in the room. So those sorts of things stay there forever, and those go into the creep deflection. Okay, so that is the first half of serviceability, deflections. The next part is cracks. Okay. Basically, we're just going to have some prescriptive rules about how much steel to put in the beam and where. And if you follow those rules, we sort of guarantee that the cracks will not be too many and will not be too wide. Okay, and so that's serviceability. But now I want to talk a little bit about serviceability and limit states here in Japan. And so what I've just talked about, okay, so we have one, phi mn greater than mu. That's the worst case scenario. And then two, we have everyday serviceability. So it's either worst case scenario or regular everyday. You would think that there'd be something in between. And here, they do have two more. They have, I can't remember what they call it, but basically small earthquake and then medium earthquake. And then the huge earthquake is this phi mn greater than mu. So they have 4 levels of limit states here. They have serviceability, everyday, ultimate, and 2 in between. That's what they're proposing. A lot of the papers I'm reviewing are about that. So there you go. Just today, I listened to a talk and I'm reviewing a paper on cracks. Okay? And cracking this was in columns. And the reason they're doing this is because you need some way to define these 2 intermediate service states. And what this one guy was doing was relating it to the amount of cracks. And so they actually have models and methods here to predict the number of cracks and how wide the cracks will be. and how much these cracks are contributing towards a building drifting over. And it's kind of a big thing here. This cracking is much more, the cracking analysis here is much more quantitative than what we do in the United States. We can talk about this more when we get to the serviceability section of the course. But anyway, this is the second to last topic for our brief overviews. I'll end it with a little talk about columns next.